There are so many different factors that go into someone becoming an elite level athlete. And I think for the most part, a lot of coaches, parents, and athletes get the wrong idea of what that process actually looks like and how most elite level athletes actually become elite level athletes. So in this video, I'm gonna kind of give you my blueprint. If my sole job was to take a kid from the age of 0 all the way to 21 and build the best athlete possible, how would I do that and what would that process look like? So my first point, up until the age of 10, really all the way up until 18, but especially up until age 10, we should not be forcing them to work out, to practice, to go play when they do not want to be playing basketball, right? Everything up until this age should be because they want to do it. If we're forcing them to go train or go outside and go play basketball when they don't want to, it's gonna start to create some resentment. They're not going to enjoy the sport because they're being forced to do it even though they don't want to. So really in general, this is just going to hurt the entire cause that we're talking about in this video. So up until that age, try to make everything about just fun. They wanna go play, encourage them if they want to, allow them the resources to go and play if they want to, whether it's a hoop outside or them being able to go to a court when they want to. But the biggest thing up until this age is really just fun and exposure. And going off that point, point number 2 is there should be no formal training or workouts that this kid should be attending, right? Everything should be competitive games with their friends or with you as the parent or with their coach. Everything should be actually playing the game of basketball with their friends, 3-on-3, 5-on-5. There should be no real formal training, working on specific skills, right? Again, to kind of go back to that whole prodigy thing is most of the kids that you see that are prodigies at age 10, 12, they don't become high-level players because they relied on those fine technical skills that they had early on. So they just didn't have to develop everything else around that most kids who don't have that skill have to develop. So really, again, everything is just about exposure first and then accuracy second. So we shouldn't be focused on these technical skills, refining their form at 10 years old. Again, everything's about fun. Allow them to enjoy the game, play as much as possible, and there should be no formal workouts or training that they should be attending. So point number 3 is this kid should not be specializing in basketball at all at this age. They should be playing as many different sports as possible. Even if they just play basketball from an organizational standpoint, they should be playing other sports outside that for fun, right? Playing soccer with their friends, playing baseball, playing tennis, right? Whatever sports that they want to play or that they enjoy, they should be doing. This is going to be super beneficial for them to get away from basketball so they don't burn out early, to reduce the chance of getting injured, but also just give them exposure to as many different movement patterns as possible. So we're starting to build that coordination and foundation for that athlete down the road. And when they're playing these sports, as a parent, we need to make sure that we're praising effort as opposed to performance, right? So especially early on, whether it's basketball, tennis, soccer, don't critique them based on their performance, critique them based on their effort. If we're starting to critique them this early, even in general, all the way up until they're 18, based on their performance, they're gonna be more worried about that. At this age, it does not matter how well they're performing in these games. The biggest thing is development and effort. They enjoy working hard and they get praised for working hard, they're going to continue to do that. But if they're getting praised based on their performance, that's all they're gonna be worried about, and that's going to hurt their development because they're not gonna stretch outside their comfort zone, which is going to help them improve. Again, it doesn't matter how many points your child scores, or if you're a coach, how many points that this certain kid scores at 10 years old, right? It's all about getting better and them being comfortable, stretching, trying new things, getting outside their comfort zone, messing up, and being okay with that, especially early on. If we ingrain in them early that performance is the biggest and most important thing at this age, again, we're going to be hurting their development long term. So my last point for up until age 10 is these kids need free time and they cannot be overscheduled. Now, I totally get where this comes from. Again, these parents want to provide as many opportunities as they possibly can. They're going from a training session to AAU practice to travel practice, which is great. They're doing a lot of different things, but everything is supervised. And they're also only playing one sport. So when they're in this supervised environment, again, they're not challenging themselves as much. They're not stretching. They're not just trying as many different things. What you see with a lot of kids when they're doing unsupervised activities, maybe they're at a park with their friends playing tag, jumping, climbing on a jungle gym, playing soccer, they're trying different things and they're comfortable stretching their comfort zone because there's no parent or coach telling them that they're messing up or they have to do it this way, right? What you see with a lot of these elite level athletes is they did a lot of supervised sports and activities and playing at the park. And because of that, they were able to develop their game because they weren't worried about the judgment of a parent or of a coach. So even though we're trying to build this elite level athlete, and again, this is where a lot of the misconception comes in, is we need to give them as much exposure to the game, playing as much organized basketball as possible. We need to be helping them, training with them at all times, It's actually really the opposite. Give them as much exposure to the game on their own. Allow them to go play with their friends at the park by themselves, play tag with their friends by themselves. And this is where a lot of that exploration and learning is going to come from, which they're going to benefit a lot down the road. So now we'll get into that 11 to 14-year-old range. This is where often a lot of parents, again, really try to start to push that issue to putting their kid on the best team, really putting them in organized training, trying to just focus on one sport. And again, this is where parents often go wrong. And I completely get where it's coming from. Again, you want your kid to be the best that they possibly can, but oftentimes that turns around to bite them in the ass. So at this age, the child should still be playing multiple different sports. Would not recommend just focusing on basketball at this stage. Allow them to explore as many different opportunities in sports and movements as they possibly can. At this stage, oftentimes AAU comes in as well, which can absolutely be beneficial, but make sure you're putting them on a team that is going to help them develop, right? It's not about exposure at this age. I know a lot of parents like, oh, 8th grade year is so important, or seventh grade is so important for their exposure. No, it's not. Your kid is not going to get any certain exposure that's going to really make that big of a difference. Maybe if they want to go to a prep school, maybe, but at the end of the day, if your kid's good enough, they can go to a prep school, or they can do that later. So again, 11 to 14, we're still just focused on development. So put them on a team that's going to help them do that. Don't put them on the best team where they're the worst kid on the team. They're not going to get better because they're not getting minutes. They're not getting reps in practice. Try to get them on a team where they're somewhat in the middle to maybe a little bit on the better side of the team, right? They're getting plenty of minutes in practice, plenty of reps in games, so that way they can develop their skills. Also, coach really matters at this point in the game. I'm not going to get too much into that, but again, make sure a coach that is focused on development, not critiquing them, and making sure that they're performing to the best of their ability and trying to win championship games in 7th grade AAU, right? That does not matter. Development is the main focus. Now, from a training perspective, this is a good time for them to start to get into some organized training, get into some athletic development. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean strength training and lifting, but if the kid wants to do that, they can. Again, that's another major point. Don't force them into training at this age. If they want to start working out with a trainer, if they want to start lifting, allow them to, but do not force them to do it. Again, they're just going to resent it and not want to do it as they get older. So with that said, what should workouts look like at this age from the 11 to 14-year-old range? I still think it's mainly about exposure. I wouldn't at this age try to completely change a kid's shot or just completely solely focus on very specific skills. I don't want to box a kid in too early. This is what you see a lot of times with travel coaches. Oh, this kid's a shooter, so the kid just keeps working on shooting. Or this is a big guy, let's just work on big guy skills, and then that kid starts to not grow anymore, and now they're a point guard, right? So I'm still gonna work on a very broad range of skills at this age. I wouldn't fine tune anything, be too specific. And then everything would be getting them a lot of exposure to game-based activities, right? So 2-on-2, 3-on-3, working on spacing, right? This is where it's teaching them how to play the game as opposed to just working on fine-tuned skills. If they can play within an environment, they're getting a lot of reps in terms of their reads, passing reads, finishing reads, all of these kind of things. Then we can fine-tune the specific skills later as they get a little bit older. But that's how I would typically train 11 to 14. A lot of game-based activities, still a lot of competitive stuff, still making it fun, but being a little bit more specific somewhat with what we're working on, but everything's still really based on the games-based approach, a lot of reads, and playing within the game itself, spacing, cutting, handoffs, pick and roll situations, all that kind of stuff, and then we'll work on the specific skills later on. And with that training, parents should still be as involved as little as possible. If you're working with your child in training and that's how you guys are working out, completely okay, but try to not be involved as much as possible. Again, this is a really tough dynamic. Some parents do it really well, most parents do not. And if you are going to work out with your child, don't judge them based on how they're performing, just judge them based on their effort, right? If you're critiquing every little thing, they're not only going to get resentment for you, but they're just not gonna wanna work out, which isn't going to help the cause at all. And then my final point at this age is make sure you're giving this kid time off, right? A lot of parents are 12, 13, 14 years old, the kid's playing AAU year-round, they're playing a sport at all times, and they never get time off to be a kid, to do what they want to do, right? So still give them time off. They're still a kid. Allow them to be a kid. There's still a lot of time left for this kid to develop and improve. So with that said, now we'll get into the 15 to 18 or 21-year-old range. So with this age range, this is where I would say it's okay for a kid to specialize in one sport. They make that decision, again, not the parent. They say, I don't really want to play these other sports. I just want to focus on basketball. This is what I'm passionate about. This is what I want to do every day. that's completely okay. I would still try to micro-dose with other sports just to reduce injury, reduce burnout, and just give them exposure to other movements that they don't normally get during just basketball. And then this is also where AAU and exposure becomes a little bit more important. Again, at the end of the day, you can get all the exposure you want, but if you're not the athlete that you need to be, it's not going to matter anyways, right? So I think, again, even from that 11 all the way up until 18-year-old range, a lot of parents focus too much on exposure. If your kid's not good, it doesn't matter if they're getting seen, right? So it's obviously a balance. They need to develop and get exposure. Your kid can be as good as you want. If they never get exposure, they're never going to make it to that highest level possible. So it's definitely important. Getting onto a better team is going to become a little bit more of a priority in terms of exposure. It all depends on your area, your AAU team. Do you play for a prep school team? All that kind of stuff. What kind of connections do your coaches have? All really depends. It's very situational, but I would make this a little bit more of a priority to make sure that your child, or if you're an athlete watching, that you are getting seen in some capacity. Now, in terms of training, this is where it can become much more specific, right? That player most likely has a certain type of game that they're going to be playing with for the rest of their career. Maybe they grew, now they're 6'11". They're most likely not going to be a point guard. Not that they can't, but they most likely have some sort of a game that you can kind of build around and be a little bit more specific. And because we worked on all those reads, playing within a system, they know how to do all that. Now we can fine tune those skills, right? So it's a lot easier to teach a player who has the reads to just teach them the skill to accompany that read and just fine tune that skill. It's a lot harder to teach a kid that has the technical skill the right reads and to do everything at the right time. So that's why, again, at the beginning, I said exposure first, accuracy second. It's a lot easier to do that, and you're going to see a lot quicker improvement if you do it that way. Now, it's also important at this age that the person your child is working with, if they're doing training with somebody, they actually know what they're doing in terms of on court as well as off court in the weight room as well. This is where a lot of kids can really thrive and make big jumps if they're not the most athletic kid or they haven't really fully developed. Once they start lifting and they're training in a very specific manner and they're getting the right amount of work in the right way, this is where they can see a huge jump in their game. And this is where a lot of kids, if they just did this, they'd see huge jumps, but often they don't do that. So I would definitely prioritize athletic development and some sort of specific training at this age. Not that it's the end all be all, you don't need to do that, but if you don't have the best genetics in the world, you're often going to need some sort of work in the weight room in terms of athletic development. Now, even if you do all of this, still might not be enough. Basketball, especially, even other sports, is very, very determined on genetics, right? You can tell your kid all you want, hey, just work hard, you can become the best player in the world. Not true, to a degree, right? There's obviously some exceptions, but for the most part, the average wingspan in the NBA is 6'9". If you're my height, 5'7", your wingspan is 5'9", 5'11", you're already at a disadvantage. If you're not 6'4", you're already at a disadvantage. There's so many things that you can do, so it's not necessarily about reaching the pinnacle, making it to the NBA, but maximizing the potential that you had as a player. So this is what I would say if you want to maximize your potential from a whole, all the way from 0 to 21, this is that recipe that I would do. So this is often the blueprint that you guys see a lot of these elite level athletes have. They played a lot of different sports. They didn't have a parent overlooking their shoulder at every turn, at every single game, every time that they wanted to go outside and just mess around and play hoop or go to the park. They got a lot of exposure early on, and then maybe they fine-tuned with training at 16, 17, 18 years old. Then they started to get in the weight room, and then they started to, right? So everything kind of coincides to build towards that bigger picture to become the best athlete possible. So it's not just get your kid into the door, get them training at 8 years old, get them playing AAU, focused on basketball. Oftentimes that's the worst recipe possible to getting your kid to the highest level possible. So rambled a bit. Hopefully there was some value in this that you guys could take away. Let me know your thoughts. Is there anything that I missed within this blueprint? Obviously this can go so much deeper. This could be an hour-long presentation if I really wanted it to be, but there's a lot of different factors that go into play. The coach, the athlete, the parent, all of it works into building that elite level athlete. So hopefully this helped you guys. If you guys enjoyed it, like, comment, subscribe. Appreciate it. See you guys soon.